Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rassool, and today we are speaking about the inclusion of women in media, in dialogues and decision-making spaces. But wait, no, we are speaking about the lack of inclusion of women in media, in dialogues and decision-making spaces. After the break, we're going to be speaking to Quote This Woman, an organization that seeks to increase the visibility of women in the media. And we'll also be speaking to an expert about the importance of having women's voices in decision-making spaces. But before that, we are going to have a look at a short video by Quote This Woman on the importance of women's visibility in the media. Let's have a look.
Imagine if growing up you never heard the voices of women. No mum to teach you how to look after yourself, or no Google saying that you're the brightest star in the entire universe. At Quote This Woman, our mission is to make sure that women's voices are heard, really heard. So we work to amplify women's voices in mainstream news. So normally, only 1 in 5 news experts are women. The other 4 experts, they're men. And at certain times, like during elections, the gender gap widens even more, and it's 1 woman's voice for every 7 to 8 men. In societies that silence women's voices, there's more violence, less peace, more inequality, and less justice. Quote This Woman wants to change that.
At Quote This Woman Plus, we curate a database of Women Plus trailblazers, activists, and experts, so journalists have reliable, trustworthy, and highly qualified sources they can use. In our first 2 months, during the elections, we had a list of 40 Women Plus experts. Our database was used from Paris to Nairobi, New York to Beijing. Since the elections, we've gained 10 new volunteers. Together, we've grown this list of experts to 350 and counting. When COVID hit, we responded with a COVID database. During lockdown, we doubled the size of the COVID database every 2 weeks.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Womxn Show, and today we are speaking about the lack of inclusion of women in media and decision-making spaces. And we are here in studio with Agape Johnson, who is the manager at Quote This Woman. Agape, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lenina. Thank you for having me.
So, Agape, I'm quite excited for us to have this conversation because we are speaking about women and visibility. And you've been on before with us speaking about women and visibility. But this episode was sparked because Quote This Woman noticed that one quite a big media house had done a special edition on the budget. And they had 6 men on this panel that they interviewed, or whose thoughts and insights they took, and 0 women. And I love that. I think Quote This Woman in a press release referred to it as a 100% gender gap. And so what we're going to be speaking about is the exclusion of women in these types of conversations. But before we go into that, can you tell us, so what happened exactly?
Okay, so what happened was we actually received an inbox from somebody who actually picked it up and pulled it out.
Mm-hmm.
So the woman was reading through the paper and she just said to us, hey, there's been a post budget analysis and it had a commentary from six men experts, and not one woman was included in that commentary. Um, so it was quite uncomfortable for us. It was quite shocking for us. And what we had done is our director, Kath McGrovey, reached out to the paper to express the discomfort and the shock and just to call them out on the representation of voices and that they could have actually had a more diverse panel.
So I was quite shocked also. I mean, I hadn't noticed it until I saw the press release. Um, and actually, representation of women is exactly what Quote This Woman does. And so I should have started with this. But, you know, in relation to this type of sort of episode where we've got this 100% gender gap, where we've got six men speaking about an issue and no women, just as why was this relevant to Quote This Woman? What do you guys do? And what led to you responding to it?
Okay, so Quote This Woman Plus is working to transform the gender gap in the media landscape. What we have found is that for every four people that are interviewed in the media, only one is a woman. Wow. So there's a huge gender gap between men and women in terms of who is getting quoted and whose voices are being heard in the media. So we curated a database of African women plus that journalists across the globe can access when they want to use, when they're looking for sources for their news stories. So that's what Quote This Woman does. So when we had received the news about the six-man panel or commentary, the first thing that we thought was we have this amazing database of women plus experts in the fields of everything from A to Z that they could speak to. And so it was quite shocking that there were no women there and we had not been contacted or reached out to access any of these voices.
So this resonates because we are in 2024, full social media swing. It's not the first time we've heard of this type of thing happening. And so often every couple of months, I know, me watching dialogues in the sector or as a journalist sort of doing research, we have seen that sometimes people will put posters out about a specific topic, sometimes even women's issues, and there will be an all-male panel. And what will follow often is them being sort of called out. I've seen, actually, there was an experience, and I don't remember who it was, but I remember not canceling, specifically called out, and what the organization did was take down the original poster and then re-uploaded it with two women, but still as an afterthought. So what does it mean? Quote This Woman has been around for a few years. What does it mean that in 2024, we are still seeing this sort of invisibility of women? And I think not just the fact that it happened, but the fact that they didn't even realize that they were doing it.
Yeah, I think it shows, Lenina, the unconscious bias that we have inbuilt in us, that we are not aware of, first and foremost. And then secondly, it's when you realize that there's this bias, do you know how to go about addressing that bias? What are you doing to make sure that as you're creating your news stories, that you are actually filtering out this bias? What resources or tools are available for you to be able to do that? So it's really shocking in 2024 that we're still having this conversation.
Yeah.
But what it just shows is that there's just not enough awareness from an individual level consciously, but also in the newsroom and in the media at large. It's just not being implemented.
I love that you spoke about unconscious bias, which basically means we don't realize that we are making this mistake. Let's call it a mistake. I think actually, and we'll get to how the media house responded. I think they said it was a mistake. But when we think about unconscious bias, we're not even aware that we were sort of doing it. And then you followed and you said, when we see something like this, do we know what to do? And so in the case of this media house, a reader had noticed it and had contacted Quote This Woman. This is partly the reason why Quote This Woman was started. I guess I want to ask if other people are there and we're having this public conversation, we've got a lot of audiences watching, there might be more women also picking up this unconscious bias. Is this something that they can contact Quote This Woman about?
Definitely. So we've been contacted not only for media, where readers or women have noticed that there's been unbiased. We've been contacted even for events, just panels at events, um, discussions, dialogues. So wherever people are actually seeing the imbalance, they've been contacting us. And so usually what we would do is we would reach out to the panelists or the media house or whoever it is and say, hey, are you actually aware of the fact that you have an all-male panel, or we have this database that you can access next time if you are looking for women plus experts. So yeah, women and anybody actually who picks up these biases are welcome to contact Quote Women Plus.
Do you think, and so that's great. I'm learning something here also. And I think, but Quote This Woman, you're a small organization, you've got limited human resources. And I think as a woman, like when I see things like this, sometimes often it is difficult for us to speak out. We know in general, it's difficult for us to speak out, to call out an unconscious bias. Not everybody responds very well to being called out, right? But do you think it's important then, I think, that we do this, even in our personal capacities, even when we go to events? What do you think we should be doing? And I think as women, as women ourselves, when we see this unconscious bias playing out, we are more likely to notice it than the people who put the panels together. What does that look like if we want to say something?
So I think, and I completely agree. It's not an easy thing to do. Even though we say call it out or speak on it, it's not easy. But I think the more we actually begin to acknowledge it and do something about it, whether it's we just speak up, and we have an approach. We have a very we are not against the media. We are not against panelists that are completely male dominated. We want to work with you, right? So we want to firstly make you aware of the bias. So women should realize that when you are actually taking that micro action in your space, it's first and foremost to make the other party aware of the fact that there is this bias. And you'd be surprised that the response that you will get is actually, oh, I didn't know, or oh, next time I'm going to think about this. So despite what you think the outcome might be, I think it's just so important to keep driving at speaking out and owning the power to actually speak on these biases. Because that's eventually what's going to actually drive the change. So I think it's really, really important to note that.
Okay, so can I ask you, what was the response from the media house? Because what This Woman did was they wrote a letter to the editor, but then also sent the letter out along with some context as a sort of press release, right? So they let everybody know that, hey, this happened, we've contacted the editor. What was the response from the media house?
So it was a good response. It was a positive response. First and foremost, it took accountability for the fact that they did not include women in the commentary, and that they should have actually done more work put more efforts towards doing that. And they also made a commitment towards actually, in future, going forward, to be as balanced as they possibly can be. So the response was really good. It was very positive, and we hope that they will stick to that. Yeah.
And we do hope. I mean, the one thing that I was thinking about really is, which ties into unconscious bias, is that, one of the ways to fix this problem is going to take a deeper awareness, obviously. So going forward, having Quote This Woman, having pointed out that, hey, you maybe not intentionally, but you excluded women 100% from this conversation. Women need to be in this conversation. We're going to be speaking about why that is later in the show. You said that 1 in 4 interviewees by the media, only 1 in 4 is women. So for every 4 people interviewed, one is a woman. What should we be aiming for?
I think we should be aiming for, first and foremost, in terms of the quantitative side, we should be aiming for equality in numbers. So seeing a more increase in women's voices. So whether it's interviewees in articles, TV shows, commentaries and analysis, it's important that we try to get a balanced choice of voices. So if you're interviewing 6 men, or if you need 6 expert sources, try to balance it out. Let's get 3 men and let's get 3 women. And there's also, I mean, amongst women as well, there are also other divisions, right? So you have other marginalized voices within the women's space. And so you can think around that. So you could say, we would love to get more women in the media, but also, are we representing women of color? Are we representing women living with disabilities? Are we representing voices that are often unheard, beyond just saying there's a woman here and that we're happy with that? So it's about increasing the number of voices, but also improving the kind of voices that you're putting on as well.
No, I get that, and that's the intersectional lens, right? So that's saying no single group knows everything about the different groups that are operating, and so we need these diverse voices so that we are addressing the lived reality and the problem and whatever it is. In this case, budget allocations properly for everyone, and so that's really, really important. One of the things I wanted to ask you for, and I always speak about this when Quote This Woman comes up, you said we want to increase women's voices, increase the amount of women that are quoted in articles, in TV shows, and analysis. And so Quote This Woman and the Womxn Show have had a relationship for a while. We have spoken already about the difficulties some women feel in actually being in the media space. I know that on this show, sometimes when I've tried to get certain women on to come and speak on a certain topic, they themselves are sort of self-rejecting, if you want to think about it that way. They do not think that they know enough. They do not think that they are ready. Lots of different things come up. What is your sort of response to that, I think, to women who are hesitant about being seen in these spaces?
So, I mean, it's definitely something that we need to acknowledge because it's there. And I think we are just so used to seeing male perspectives all the time that, first of all, we're just not used to it. But secondly, I think we need to acknowledge that when a media house reaches out to you, when a journalist reaches out to you, they're reaching out to you for a reason. So they, first of all, want your perspective. Secondly, they think that you're qualified enough to offer your perspective, and they think that your perspective is of value. So the fact that you are being contacted by the media already should be enough validation for you to acknowledge that your voice has value. And then with that as well, your voice is important. So also understand that what you have to say is just as important as any other male voice. Despite what you feel, despite the fear, because I know it's really difficult. I think the more you try and the more you practice, the easier it will become. And just valuing that your voice is important and practicing that on little levels, as well as on the big grander scale when you're being contacted by the media.
I love that. I love that you said, especially, something practical for people to keep in mind is that if you are contacted, that already gives you and your knowledge legitimacy because they want to interview you for a reason. They've noted you. I also just want to ask, so when you work directly with media houses, women feel very intimidated by media. When you work with the media houses, do you have any advice or tips for how to make this space better and easier for women also who may be hesitant to, step into that space?
So I think some of the fears that come forward quite a bit is I'm just afraid of like the agenda behind the media house, or is the journalist going to represent me in the wrong way? So that is something that we've noticed has come up a lot. And so our advice would be to journalists and to media houses is to, when you are interviewing this woman and reaching out to this woman, kind of reassure them to some degree that first and foremost, this is the reason why you want to reach out to them. But secondly, that it's a safe space and that you're reaching out to them because you value what they have to say, you value their expertise, and that's genuinely what it's about. Because there's a misinterpretation or there's a misunderstanding actually of what is it that the media houses want with these women, and it's some of the myths that we have to debunk as we engage with the media. That the media is not out to get you. The media is not always out to get you. Journalists are not always out to get you.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I want to throw one last question in there. So we know also research has shown that often when women do get a lot of attention is usually for 16 days, Women's Month, interesting, it's International Women's Month now, 16 days of activism, gender-based violence. There are certain specific topics that are sort of fall under a made-up category of women's issues. Have you had feedback from women who have expressed some sort of frustration with only being approached for those types of things, as opposed to other things like we pointed out, maybe financial or budget or business and so forth?
So I don't have any direct recollection of instances where women have pointed it out, but we definitely have. So we've noticed that when it comes to soft news and hard news, we notice that we get approached a lot by the media for women when it's soft news related topics.
Oh, wow.
Like your lifestyle and, and then as soon as it's hard news, we generally tend to find the trend of male-only voices or sources, expert sources. So there's definitely an unconscious bias there in terms of the type of news that women can actually speak on as well. And we've actually picked that up ourselves.
Oh wow, Agape, like that's actually quite valuable. That's interesting. I've been watching some films and documentaries from sort of the early years of media and how women were only given like soft news desks and not even allowed to do hard news. So it's interesting that how that is carried through, I think, through the ages. We have like 1 minute left. How can people get hold of Quote This Woman?
Okay, so you can contact us on, you can visit us on www.quotethisswomanplus.org.za. We also have a WhatsApp chat line, so if you go onto the website, you're able to WhatsApp us directly, you're able to email us, and you're able to call us. If you're an expert, Women Plus expert, you're able to go to the website and sign up as an expert to be contacted by journalists. And if you're a journalist looking for diverse sources, you're also able to actually sign up and become a journalist on our platform.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lenina.
We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and today we are speaking about women and visibility in the media and women's voices in governance. And joining me now is Dr. Michelle Maziwisa, who is a program manager at the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria, and a lot of her work is focused on women's rights. And actually, we've had Michelle on before, where we have spoken about the importance of women's voices in governance. Michelle, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lenina. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back. Thanks so much for the invitation.
I am so excited to have you back. I mean, the last time we spoke about such important and interesting things. And now we are back because the organization, Quote This Woman, has highlighted what was a media special on the budget that had a 6-man panel with the emphasis on man, meaning 6 men, and no women who were contributing to the conversation. And so we really wanted to bring you on to speak about the last time we spoke about the importance of women's voices in these conversations, women's voices in the allocation of resources and budget, specifically when it comes to services. And so, Michelle, I think I want to start with that question. So, when we think about budgets and finance, how important is it for women to contribute to this conversation?
Thanks, Lenina. That's a great question. And I have to start by thanking you and the show for creating a space where we can have conversations like this, conversations that focus on issues that matter to women. Um, and you rightly noted that in media, but also in life in general, there tends to be this perception of a gender neutral approach to things, but this gender neutral approach is actually very male centric in its essence, because life as we know it has been framed by generations and generations excuse me, of men in authority, men in power, who have shaped the world as we see it today. So it's great to have a dedicated space where we can speak about this. I think when you think about budget and finance, to get to your question, what's important is to understand that where you put your money shows you where your priorities are. So having women excluded from budget and finance processes takes women out of the room when it comes to setting the budget priorities on things that matter to women that should actually be financed or provided for. So, when we think about budget and finances, it's important to realize that budgets not only show your priorities, but they also allow you to realize, for example, socioeconomic rights, but also allow you to facilitate economic equality, not just between women and men, but across society as a whole. So the issue of gender budgeting is actually crucial. Some may refer to it as gender sensitive budgets, or they may also call them gender responsive budgets. But for me, what's important in terms of bringing women to the table on gender issues is two things. First of all, there has to be participation of women on anything that relates to finances and budgets. In actual fact, women's participation in all areas of life. But as we're speaking about budgets, there has to be participation. It must be inclusive. And the second thing is that there must also be mainstreaming within the budget to analyze economic policy in relation to how it affects women, to analyze which areas require redistribution of economic resources, and also to bring women's issues to the table, because it's important to hear the voices of the people who are affected by the budget. And if they're not at the table when those matters are discussed, it means that their voices tend to, their needs tend to get pushed to the back. Another thing that's important to consider in terms of budgets and finance is that many times there is a lack of recognition of women's contribution to the economy when it comes to areas of work that are not paid, what we call unpaid work. And there is historically an unequal burden of time and care that is placed on women because of the societal constructs that place women as the primary caregivers in many households. So things like that don't always automatically find their way to the table when women are not present at the table. Usually people speak to their lived realities or their lived experiences. And it's important to have a broader perspective on financial issues than that is provided by men. Of course, I do appreciate that there are some men who take part in initiatives such as He for She that contribute to the discussion on gender from a feminist lens. But be that as it may, it's also important to have the actual women who are affected by this financial framework in the room speaking about their own needs. And in that same spectrum, it's also important to understand that women are not one homogeneous group. There's a wide range of women across the economic or income spectrum, right? So the women that live in rural contexts, there are women who live in urban contexts, there are young women, there are old women, there are women that have different experiences, different access to resources, and all of those voices need to somehow find their way into the national budget and finance processes. To also think about it this way in practical terms, if you look at
I was just about to ask you about practical terms now.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this. So
I love it. I'm learning so much.
So that's great. If you look at it from the local government perspective, if you look at the local government budget, in South Africa, there's a decentralization of powers in the constitution, which mandates the local government to have certain functions or functional areas. Among these is child care facilities within a municipality. It's important for women to be able to speak to how much money is actually allocated in the budget for the servicing of these facilities, because women find themselves living in these socially constructed roles of caregiving. So it becomes more important for the person who has that responsibility. If you look at it from the provincial perspective, provinces have the responsibility to implement education policy. So issues relating to the financing of education, that is a priority area that women would want to focus on, also because of their societally given caregiving responsibility. And when you now look at it, for example, at the um, national level, you're looking at issues around healthcare. You're looking at issues around access to food, access to shelter. Those are especially important matters in South Africa, where we have about 42% of households that are headed by women. So these are bread and butter issues that every woman should be thinking about. In fact, every person in the country should be thinking about. But if we don't hear those voices, it creates a vacuum. When you're also looking at, for example, your tax policy within the national budget, certain taxes create disadvantages for women. There's a study by the OECD which looks at regressive taxes, and one of them is value added tax. So, because of women's spending patterns also associated with the care responsibility, women tend to spend more on goods for the household. And usually, when value added tax is increased, it actually disproportionately affects women. And in the end, women have less income because they are more affected by value added tax than men. So, going down to the nitty gritty to really disaggregate how finances are working within our system and where do women find themselves within that system, that is important. If you look at it internationally, you're looking at treaties. These are international agreements between governments. Some of these treaties speak to trade agreements which allow different countries to exchange goods across borders, right? These treaties don't just automatically apply in South Africa. They have to be acceded to or ratified. But then for them to apply in South Africa, because it has a dualistic legal system, they also have to be translated into our national law. And our lawmaking is done by the legislature, which is our national parliament, who are the people we're going to vote into power in May. Okay. Some of those policies will determine which companies are bringing business to South Africa, right? And when we look at which companies are bringing business into South Africa, we also have to think about this emerging concept of feminization of labor. Employment is a national issue, but it's also a budget issue. So the feminization of labor is where we're seeing more exporting companies coming into a country and prioritizing the employment of women in their production processes. So yes, when you look at it from labor, you're thinking, okay, we're going to have more people employed. That means they have more access to finances. That means they have more agency within the home to make the decisions. It means they are more capable to access services like healthcare, sexual and reproductive health, food, and so forth. But on the flip side of that, when you understand some of the reasons behind feminization of labor, you tend to take a step back, because feminization of labor is also associated with companies targeting women because fewer women are unionized, because they can give women jobs that are not secure, that are temporary or seasonal, jobs that are not permanent, jobs that are not top positions, jobs that are precarious, that have that have more risks, that don't have benefits, that don't have social security benefits. So it always has to be factored in, and it's important to analyze at every stage of the step, where is the money, how is it being used, and where do women fall within that spectrum.
Wow, that is a lot. That is so much. I
It's a
mean,
lot.
all of this is so
It's a
interesting. I'm
lot.
also thinking, like, when you're speaking about feminization of labor, which wasn't even on my radar actually, but there's, to consider the gender pay gap, that women get paid less
Yes.
just by nature of being female. And, historically, that's also a huge aspect here, right? And so,
Absolutely.
thank you very much for bringing that in. I want to ask, Michelle, so all of these things, right, they sound, and let's say we're speaking to layman citizens, we're speaking to people on the ground, I'm listening to you, these are all really important. I want to get on top of each and every one of them. It also makes us really afraid. It makes the system seem so complex. There's so many issues. Um, I read something the other day that really, and I wrote it down and pasted it up on my wall, because the term and the language of politics seems so much bigger than what we are sometimes, especially if we're starting from a point where we don't have this historical knowledge, to come from, and we don't quite understand how the system works. But what this quote said was, politics is just about what is prioritized, who gets what, and how that is distributed. And so I put that down. And so when you were saying that, and I'm trying to think about how can we help women understand, well, everyday women, right? You mentioned also women in rural areas, like everyone. How can we frame this or understand this as something that we can have an impact on? I guess maybe I'm asking about engagement. Like, how do we engage with these issues?
Sometimes you get lost because being very passionate about this area, you can quite easily get lost. But what I think is important to understand is that politics and governance is not something that applies to a specific type of person. It's not something for the educated. It's not something for professionals. It's not something that has a specific type of people that it applies to. Every person that lives within the borders of this country lives and experiences life in this country, and they have a voice. So it's important to always make sure that all the different voices are included in the conversation. We speak about participation, right? Right now is the season when election education is taking place. It's important to bring in those grassroots voices. It's important to have conversations with people that just live a basic everyday life, whether it's in the city or in a rural area, just bringing in those voices, because everyone has something to say. And when you look at it from a democracy perspective, when we go to vote, whether it's for local government or now in this year when we're voting for national and provincial government, what's important to understand is when we're talking about democracy, we're simply saying, in order for us as a group of people living in a certain area to be heard and to be represented, we are choosing to elect this person or these people to go and speak on our behalf about these matters. That's essentially what election is and what democracy is. So the challenge is that at the moment, if you look at our history from about 2004 to I think 2019 in the national government elections, the percentage of women represented has increased from about 30% to just over 42%, if I'm not mistaken. But that means that in a country that has more than 51% of women, it means less than the number of women that are in the country actually can speak about women's issues in national government.
Wow.
So it's taking it at the very, very basic level. Who are you giving your voice to speak about the things that matter to you? If you look at your sort of your local environment, you think about the electricity crisis, you think about the water crisis, You think about sending kids to school. You think about getting an equal pay at your job. You think about getting an education. These things have to be as accessible to women as they are to men. It shouldn't be an extra hurdle just to go through basic life, just because of how your body is structured. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So I think for everyday women, that's the thing to keep in mind as you're casting your ballot. Who do you want to be your voice in government when you're not there to speak for yourself? So that means you have to understand what is prioritized in the party manifestos, for example. Do they speak to the things that matter to you in the way that you want them to speak about these things? When they speak about women in their manifesto, and you look at the performance of the political party in the last elections, does what they say in the manifesto match they actually did in the last few years? Is there something that you would want to see done differently? You know, those are the questions that women should be asking themselves. How many women do you want to have in government? How many women actually can take senior positions? Um, and this year, as you know, there's a slight addition to the elections. In the past, the national government elections used to have only two ballots, one for the National Assembly and one for the provincial legislature. And these were both proportional representation or party list votes. But this year, they've introduced a third ballot, which is for the regional vote. And this is to vote for the person within your province who's going to represent you in the National Assembly. So for the first time, the 400 National Assembly seats are going to be divided such that 200 for the regional representatives. So let's say you vote for someone. If you live in the Western Cape, you're going to have a vote for a representative in the Western Cape. So 200 of those will be regional votes, which can be either, then you also, the remaining 200 seats will be proportional representation. And what we have seen in the past is that when there is a party list, because of the framing of legislation in South Africa, that creates a binding obligation on a political party to bring them to that there must be gender equality, that there must be gender parity. And I say suggestion because the language is not strong enough to force the IEC to refuse a party list that is not gender balanced. So what that means in practice is it leaves a lot of the power in the hands of political parties to decide in terms of their own policies, how they're going to bring women to the elections as candidates. So you'll see political parties like the ANC, which has a zebra list of one woman, one man. You will see the EFF has a policy of 50% women. And then you see, for example, the Democratic Alliance, which has a policy of women must stand on their own merit. So these are just some of the parties that have been sort of internet. But what we have that are elected into office when a party list is used, where the political party deliberately brings women to the table, like through the zebra list, right? And then when it comes to women standing on their own merit, like as independent candidates, that one of the difficulties we have as a society, and I think even as a region, is that many women, is that society has not yet accepted fully that women are fully capable of taking leadership roles, are fully capable of taking positions in national parliament, or even in local government.
I'm so sorry to cut you, but that is such a good space to end off so that we can start mitigating as a society. We are unfortunately out of time, but we must have you back to discuss this further. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
We should. There's so much to talk about, and I really appreciate that you invited me to have this conversation.
I really, really, really appreciate that you came on here. You've told us so much. I think it's so helpful. But we need to take a short break. We will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show, and we've been having a great discussion about the visibility of women in media and in decision-making spaces. Now, we are almost at the end of our hour together, but before we go, we are going to play out with a short video that looks at the many spaces in which women exist and how policy needs to support this. Let's have a look. That was a short video on the many spaces in which women work, live, and provide care. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rassool. Goodbye.